Today, we're going to dive into On Disobedience, a really powerful collection of essays by the social psychologist Erich Fromm. In it, he poses this radical challenge to one of our most deeply held beliefs. He argues that real freedom isn't found in compliance, but in our capacity to say no. So, right out of the gate, Fromm hits us with this bombshell of an idea. For pretty much all of history, we've been taught that obedience is a virtue and disobedience is a vice. But Fromm just stops and asks, what if we have that completely backward? What if humanity's greatest threat isn't rebellion, but our own unthinking, absolute obedience? That's the core idea we're going to unpack. So, to build his case, Fromm first takes us way back to our foundational myths. And he reinterprets them, not as stories about sin, but as these epic tales of liberation that all started with disobedience. He kicks things off by completely reframing the story of Adam and Eve. He argues that when they disobeyed God, they didn't fall from grace, not at all. Instead, they took the very first, painful, but absolutely necessary step toward becoming fully human. That one act of saying no is what broke them out of just being part of nature, turned them into individuals, and kicked off human history itself. And he sees the exact same pattern in Greek mythology. Take Prometheus. He steals fire from the gods, a huge act of disobedience. And by doing so, he lays the foundation for all of human civilization. And yeah, like Adam and Eve, he's punished horribly for it, but he never says he's sorry. That proud defiance is what Fromm sees as the very engine of our evolution. So the big takeaway from this first part is incredibly powerful. Fromm's point is that every single major step forward for humanity, whether it's spiritual, scientific, you name it, it all depended on someone, somewhere, having the ability to be disobedient, to say no to the powers that be. Okay, but hold on. This doesn't mean Fromm is just advocating for total chaos. He's much more nuanced than that. He makes this really critical distinction between different kinds of obedience and different kinds of authority. He really forces us to ask this question. And the answer, of course, is no. It's not that simple. Fromm argues that you have to understand who or what you're obeying before you can ever judge the act itself. And this is where his argument gets really brilliant. He splits obedience into two types. On one side, you've got heteroautonomous obedience. It's a fancy term, but it just means submitting your will to some outside power. It's giving up your own autonomy. But on the other side, there's autonomous obedience, which really isn't about obeying someone else at all. It's an affirmation of your own reason, your own conscience. You're not submitting, you're being true to yourself. And this idea extends to authority too. He breaks it down into irrational authority, think of a slave master, where it's all based on exploitation, and rational authority, which is more like a great teacher, whose whole goal is to help you grow. Obeying a rational authority actually builds you up, while obeying an irrational one just diminishes you. Now, this whole framework becomes incredibly important because this is when Fromm applies it to our world, to modern society. He argues that we are facing a totally new kind of obedience, and it's way more subtle and dangerous because for the most part, it's invisible. Fromm warned that we're living in what he called the age of the automaton. It's a world filled with the organization man. The individual who just kind of fits in. They slot themselves into the huge bureaucratic machines of corporations and governments, and they conform without even being aware that that's what they're doing. Just look at these traits. Fromm argues that the modern person obeys these anonymous authorities, things like public opinion, or the market, or just common sense. We're guided without any obvious force, we're led without any visible leaders, and all the while we think we're making our own free choices. Our greatest fear isn't some dictator, it's just the fear of being different from the herd. To make this crystal clear, Fromm points to the chilling, real-life case of Adolf Eichmann, the Nazi bureaucrat who managed the logistics of the Holocaust. To Fromm, Eichmann was the ultimate organization man. He wasn't some raving monster, he was just a functionary, just following orders. He had so completely handed over his own moral judgment that he genuinely could not see his own guilt. And this is Fromm's really terrifying diagnosis. He says the greatest danger in modern society isn't a tyranny that shows up with guns and boots. It's a system that creates people who have lost the actual ability to say no. And even worse, they don't even realize they've lost it. So if that's the sickness, this unconscious obedience, then what's the cure? In this final section, Fromm lays out exactly what's at stake and explains what it takes to reclaim our freedom. Everything we've discussed so far really builds to this one essential question. If freedom isn't something that's just given to you, what is the one fundamental capacity you absolutely have to possess in order to achieve it? The answer is so simple, so direct, and so powerful. True freedom requires the capacity for disobedience. It's not just a right we have, it's a psychological skill that we have to cultivate. But why is it so hard? Well, Fromm explains that obedience feels safe. It's comfortable. It relieves us of that heavy burden of making our own decisions, of taking the risk of being wrong, and maybe most of all, of the terror of being truly alone. To say no, you need immense courage. It's the courage to stand alone, to make mistakes, and to be seen as a sinner by the very powers that offer you protection. And the stakes here could not be higher. You have to remember, Fromm was writing this during the Cold War. He saw this kind of unthinking obedience to nationalism and military authority as a direct path to nuclear annihilation. He believed that our very survival depends on our ability to doubt, to criticize, and when our conscience demands it, to disobey. Let's end on Fromm's final and maybe most crucial distinction. Freedom isn't about being a rebel who just mindlessly says no to everything. That's just the other side of the coin to the slave who can only say yes. True freedom, he says, belongs to the revolutionary. That's the person who can obey their own conscience, and because of that strength, has the power to disobey when it is absolutely necessary. The choice, Fromm tells us, is ours to make.